Nobody is coming. I want you to let that land. Not as defeat, not as bitterness, as the most liberating truth anyone will ever tell you. Nobody is coming to open the door. Nobody is coming to give you the opportunity you have been patient enough for. Nobody is coming to finally recognize what you are worth and decide that the moment has finally arrived to hand you the platform you have been preparing for. The mentor who was supposed to choose you, the network you were supposed to be born into, the support system that other people seem to have that makes their path look so much more manageable than yours. Some of you have been waiting patiently, loyally, with the quiet dignity of someone who believes that doing the right things for long enough will eventually produce the right outcome. And still, nobody came. Niccolo Machiavelli lost everything at 43. His career, his income, his title, his access to the people and the rooms that had defined his entire adult life. He had no mentor waiting to rescue him, no powerful friend willing to intervene, no network that held under the weight of genuine crisis. He had exactly what you have: himself, his mind, his discipline, his absolute refusal to accept that the absence of support was the same thing as the absence of possibility. And from that position of zero support, zero resources, zero allies willing to stand beside him, he built something that has outlasted everyone who ever had everything he did not. In this video, I am going to show you exactly how, not as inspiration, as instruction. Before the specific principles, I need to reframe something that almost everyone in your position gets wrong. The absence of support feels like a disadvantage, and in some ways it is. But Machiavelli understood something about support that most people only learn when the support they depended on disappears. Support has a price, not always financial, not always obvious, but the price is always there. When someone supports you, they gain a stake in your direction. They gain an opinion about your choices, an expectation about your pace, a sense of entitlement to the outcomes that their support helped produce. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who rises on the arms of others stands on unstable ground, not because those others are evil, because they are human. And humans who have invested in you always eventually expect a return on that investment that you may not be willing or able to give. The person who builds without support builds something different. Not necessarily something slower, not necessarily something smaller, something that belongs entirely to them, something that no one can claim a stake in, something that no one can redirect or dilute or quietly reshape because of what they contributed to it. Machiavelli called this building with your own arms, and he believed that the man who had built with his own arms possessed a kind of power that the man who had been carried could never fully claim. Your zero support is not only an obstacle, it is a specific kind of freedom. And if you build the way Machiavelli built, it will become your greatest structural advantage. Principle 1. Replace external validation with internal standard. This is the foundational principle, the one every other principle depends on. The person with support has external checkpoints, someone who believes in them, someone whose encouragement arrives in the moments when the doubt is loudest, someone who says keep going when keeping going feels unreasonable. You do not have that, which means you have two choices. You can treat the absence of external validation as evidence that the doubt is correct, or you can build something that external validation was always a substitute for, an internal standard, a clear, precise, personally defined measure of what good work looks like, what real progress feels like. What the next correct step is, regardless of whether anyone else can see it yet. Machiavelli developed this standard through years of studying history's greatest leaders, not to measure himself against his contemporaries, but to understand what was actually possible so that he could hold himself to a standard that the room around him was not capable of providing. When no one is telling you that you are on track, you must know from the inside whether you are or not. Build that knowledge, develop that standard, and let it be the voice that fills the silence left by everyone who did not show up. Principle 2. Make your work your loudest ally. Machiavelli understood that in the absence of powerful friends, the most powerful thing a man could do was produce work so undeniable that the work itself became his advocate, not a person speaking on his behalf, not a network opening doors for him, not a recommendation from someone with enough status to make his name mean something in rooms he had never entered. The work, speaking louder than any of those things could have spoken, because it was undeniable on its own terms. The prince was read by the powerful, not because Machiavelli had connections to the powerful. He had been stripped of those connections completely. It was read because the work itself was impossible to ignore, because the precision of the thinking, the clarity of the observation, the honesty of the conclusion was so specific, so accurate, so genuinely unlike anything else that existed, that the work traveled without him into every room he could not enter. This is your path. Not the connection that opens the door, not the supporter who speaks your name in the right room, the work that makes its own door and walks through it before you do. Build work that does not need you to be present to make its case. That is the most powerful advocate you will ever have. Principle 3. Build your network without needing it yet. Machiavelli was precise about timing in the context of alliances. He understood that the most expensive allies were always the ones sought in crisis, because in crisis, you negotiate from desperation, and desperation is visible to every person across the table, and desperation changes every term against you. The person with zero support makes a specific mistake when they network. They approach people with need written on their face, with the barely concealed urgency of someone who requires what this person has more than they require what you have. And the person on the other side, however generous their instincts, responds to that dynamic accordingly. The Machiavellian approach is to build the network now from a position of genuine contribution before you need anything from it, not as strategy designed to extract later, as the simple practice of being genuinely useful to people you respect in ways that cost you something real, your time, your knowledge, your specific capability offered without invoice, without scorecard, without the invisible expectation of immediate return. The network built that way is the only network that holds under the weight of genuine need, because it was built in calm, and things built in calm are the things that stand in the storm. Principle 4. Become dangerous in your craft. Machiavelli understood that the man who was indispensable could not be ignored, not liked, not admired, not agreed with, could not be ignored. And in a world where you have no one speaking for you, no one carrying your name into the rooms that matter, being impossible to ignore is the only substitute that actually works. Most people with zero support respond to that reality by spreading thin, by trying to be adequate at many things in the hope that something will land, by hedging, never going all the way in on anything. Because going all the way in without a safety net is genuinely terrifying. Machiavelli would tell you that this approach produces exactly the outcome it is designed to avoid: invisibility. The person who is competent at many things and exceptional at none is replaceable, and replaceable people with no support to compensate are the most invisible people in any room. The alternative is to choose one thing and go so deep, so far past competence, so far into the territory of the few rather than the many, that ignoring you becomes genuinely costly for the people who try. This takes longer than spreading thin. It feels riskier in the short run, and it is the only strategy that actually replaces what support provides. Principle 5. Use solitude as a strategic asset. This is the principle that separates the people who eventually succeed alone from the people who are slowly worn down by it. The absence of support is also the absence of noise, the absence of other people's opinions arriving in the moments when you are still forming your own, the absence of directions you never chose embedded in the advice of people who wanted good things for you, but whose good things were not the same as yours. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in solitude, not in spite of his isolation, because of it. He wrote that he would rise in the morning and go to the woods and speak to the ancient dead, meaning the writers and thinkers and leaders of history whose works he had spent his life studying.
He had no colleagues to consult, no advisors to defer to, no room full of people whose comfort he was obligated to consider before he committed to what he actually thought. And so he thought clearly, more clearly than he ever had when the room was full. The person with zero support sits in a room that is very quiet. That quiet can feel like abandonment, or it can feel like a laboratory, a space where the thinking that the noise would have interrupted is allowed to develop to its full depth without anyone redirecting it before it arrives somewhere genuinely new. Use the quiet, not as something to endure, as the specific condition that makes the work you are building different from anything built in noise. Principle 6. Protect your energy as your primary resource. The person with support has people around them who share the weight, who carry some of the emotional labor, who absorb some of the setbacks, who exist as a buffer between the person and the full force of building something alone. You are carrying all of it, and that means the management of your energy is not a lifestyle consideration. It is the single most important operational decision you make every single day. Machiavelli understood that the prince who diffused his forces across too many fronts was always weaker than the one who concentrated them. Every relationship that drains without returning, every argument entered that resolves nothing, every distraction indulged at the cost of the building work, every night of poor sleep treated as acceptable when it is not acceptable because you cannot afford to operate at partial capacity when you are the only person carrying the weight. These are not small things. They are the difference between the version of you that builds something real and the version that is always almost there but never quite arrives. Guard the sleep. Guard the attention. Guard the mental space from the conversations and the content and the people that consume it without contributing to it. You are building alone. That means every unit of energy you have is yours to deploy. Deploy it like it matters, because it does. Principle 7. Learn to move before you are ready. The person with support has people who will catch them if they fall, which means they can afford to move imperfectly.
They can afford to attempt something before it is fully formed, because the network around them absorbs the cost of the imperfection. You do not have that cushion, and so many people in your position never move at all. They wait for a readiness that is always just slightly out of reach. A little more knowledge, a little more preparation, a little more certainty that the attempt will not fail before they can afford to make it. Machiavelli was brutally clear about this. He understood that the cautious prince who waits for perfect conditions is always overtaken by the bold one who moved with imperfect ones. The absence of a safety net does not mean you wait longer. It means you build the skill of moving with what you have and correcting as you go, rather than arriving perfectly and never arriving at all. Fall forward. Learn from the ground. Get up with information you did not have before you fell, and move again, faster than anyone who was waiting to feel ready. Principle 8. Define success on your own terms, and defend that definition ruthlessly. This is the final principle, and the one that holds all the others together. The person with support often inherits a definition of success from the people who support them, the mentor who has a specific path in mind, the family whose vision of achievement is the one they understand, the network that values certain outcomes and is indifferent to others. And so the supported person often works very hard toward a destination they never fully chose. You have been spared that. Not having a support system means not having a support system's definition of what your success should look like, which means you are free in a way that the supported person rarely is, to define the destination entirely for yourself. Machiavelli answered to nobody in his exile. He was free to write the truth as he saw it, without the filter of an institution or a patron or a political alliance whose interests required a softer version. And it was precisely that freedom that made what he wrote immortal. Decide what success means to you. Not what it means to the people who did not show up, not what it means to the culture around you, not what it means in the comparison game you have been playing with people whose circumstances are fundamentally different from yours. What does it mean to you? Write that down, and then defend it every day against the noise that will try to replace your definition with someone else's. 8 principles.
an internal standard that does not need external validation. Work so undeniable it becomes its own advocate. A network built on genuine contribution before the need for it arrives. A craft developed to the level of dangerous. Solitude treated as a laboratory, not a sentence. Energy protected as the primary resource. Movement before readiness. And a definition of success that belongs entirely to you. Now I want to say something about what all 8 of these have in common. Every single one of them is an act of self-authorship, a deliberate decision to build from the inside out, rather than waiting for the outside to provide the conditions that the inside is actually capable of creating. Machiavelli was not the most talented man in Florence. He was not the most connected, not the most advantaged, not the one history would have chosen if it were looking for someone to write the most influential political text of the centuries that followed. He was the one who was left alone with nothing and decided that nothing was enough to begin. That decision is available to you. Not a scaled-down version, not in a different arena. The same decision, the same weight, the same consequence if you make it. I want to say something to the specific person this video was built for.
Not the person who is building with a team behind them. Not the person who has the mentor and the network and the family that believes in them and the friends who show up when showing up costs something. The person who is doing this alone, who closes their laptop at the end of a long day and does not have anyone to tell about the small thing that worked or the large thing that didn't, who makes the decision again every single morning without anyone around them reinforcing that the decision is worth making, who has felt at some point in some quiet moment that the absence of support might actually be information about whether the thing they are building is worth building at all. I want you to hear this directly. The absence of support has never been a measure of the value of the thing being built. The greatest works in every field, in every era, were built by people who were doing something that the people around them did not yet have the framework to understand. Support follows clarity, and clarity does not arrive from outside. It is built in exactly the silence you have been sitting in. Machiavelli was alone. He was broke. He was humiliated. He was the person that history, at that particular moment, had decided to discard. And he picked up the pen, not because someone told him to, not because the conditions were right, not because he felt certain it would work, because he had decided that the thing inside him was worth more than the silence around him. You have the same decision in front of you. Make it, not loudly, not with announcement, quietly, the way Machiavelli did, one page at a time. If this video reached something in a place you do not often let people reach, then do 3 things. First, write down the one principle from these 8 that your gut already knows is the most important place for you to begin. Not the easiest one, the most necessary one. And commit to it without announcing it to anyone, without waiting for a single person to validate that the commitment is worth making. Second, hit the like button. Not for me, for the person who is exactly where you were when this video started. Doing this alone, wondering if alone is even possible. Tell the algorithm this video exists and let it find them. And third, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because this channel was built for the person building without a safety net, for the person who does not have the room full of people cheering for them, but who shows up anyway, because the thing they are building is worth showing up for. The person who turns on the bell, who shows up before being told to, who does not wait for permission to invest in their own development, has already demonstrated. Principle 1. They built the internal standard before anyone external told them it was worth building. That is where everything starts. That is where you already are.